The family SUV showed a driver profile that didn't belong to anyone in my house. And by sunrise, I knew another man had been sitting where I taught my daughter how to drive. The screen glowed pale blue in the dark kitchen, while the coffee maker clicked and sighed through its cycle. Outside, Chico was still mostly asleep. The sycamores beyond the backyard fence were only just beginning to separate from the dark, and the first low whine of a garbage truck drifted from the next street over. Jill was upstairs in the shower, and I was standing barefoot on cool tile, looking at an app I had opened for no more dramatic reason than to check whether the fuel light had been reset after I filled the tank the night before. Instead, I found Profile 2. I was Profile 1. Jill was Profile 3 because she liked sitting high and forward, almost close enough to kiss the windshield, as I used to tease her. Our daughter Ellie didn't have a profile at all yet, but she had practiced in that seat with both hands locked at 10 and 2, while I kept my voice level and patient, and told her to ease off the brake. There was no Profile 2, not in my family, not in my life. Before I tell you how this ended, subscribe to Reddit Ride for more stories where silence cuts deeper than shouting. I kept staring at the screen like it might correct itself if I gave it enough time. It didn't. It showed a recent Bluetooth pairing to, not mine, not Jill, and not our daughter's. The device name wasn't clever or hidden. It was just there, blunt and stupid in the log, as if boldness were protection. Then I looked at the vehicle history. The SUV had been parked just after 11 the night before behind one of the newer mid-range hotels off the highway, not near the community center where Jill had told me the fundraiser committee was meeting late, and not anywhere near the homes of the women she usually named when she wanted her stories to sound harmless. Upstairs, the shower cut off. I remember every small sound after that with a clarity that still unsettles me sometimes. The shower door sliding, the thump of a bathroom drawer, Jill humming half a melody under her breath, the refrigerator motor kicking on, my coffee dripping black into a mug I never actually drank from. Memory is selective until something breaks. Then suddenly it becomes administrative. My name is Ben Mercer. I was 38 when all of this happened, and I taught history at Chico State, California political history, American reform movements, courses on rhetoric and public life. All the solemn little ironies of people standing in front of rooms and pretending language is the same thing as virtue. My students liked me because I kept lectures clear and didn't perform intelligence as punishment. My colleagues mostly tolerated me because I published enough and stayed out of department quarrels. I had been married to Jill for 6 years. She was 36, a fundraiser by profession and temperament. Even before she worked in development, she understood instinctively how to move around money without seeming greedy, how to flatter without lowering herself, how to make donors feel that what they were buying was not influence but intimacy. She was good at events, good at names, good at remembering what someone's wife had worn the last time, and whether their daughter had gotten into Stanford. She could work a room the way some people work an instrument, lightly at first, then with total command. It was one of the things that had drawn me to her, back when I still mistook fluency for warmth. For months before that morning, the marriage had felt like a house somebody had vacated one room at a time. The signs were not dramatic at first. They almost never are. Her messages got shorter, her body got stiffer in bed, not rejecting exactly, just already elsewhere. She would lean against the kitchen island texting with one thumb while I told her about a department chair meeting, then look up too late and say, "Sorry, what?" with an impatience she no longer bothered to disguise. She started buying small travel-sized hotel toiletries in bulk because, she said, she liked keeping extras in her fundraiser kits for overnight events. That explained the little shampoos in her tote, the sealed soaps, the folded sewing kits. Then I started seeing them where they did not belong, tucked in the side pocket of the SUV, slipping out of the zippered pouch in her work bag, once even in the bathroom trash under tissues and cotton pads, from hotels she had supposedly never stayed at. One night, I found 3 tiny conditioner bottles from 3 different hotels in the center console. Jill laughed when I asked about them. "Have you met fundraisers?" she said. "Every event comes with a bag of nonsense." That would have been a decent explanation if I had not seen the labels. One was from Redding, one from Sacramento, one from a boutique hotel in downtown Chico that no one used for conferences because it was too small and too expensive. But the real thing about betrayal, I learned, is that the clues aren't what convince you. They are only what rearranges what your body already knows. Jill came downstairs in a pale green blouse and cream slacks, earrings in one hand, hair still damp at the ends. She kissed my cheek, reached for the coffee I'd poured for her, and asked if I could pick up Ellie from rehearsal because she had a donor luncheon that might run long. That was how normal her voice sounded. That was what made it obscene. "Sure," I said. She smiled. "You're the best." Then she looked at the fruit bowl, frowned lightly, and asked if we were out of oranges. That was the moment I understood something had changed permanently in me. Not because I stopped loving her all at once. I didn't. That would have been too easy. But some part of me stopped volunteering trust. I said, I can grab some later. She took her coffee and her tote and left. I stood there listening to the garage door lift and shut again. Then I went upstairs, put on a blue Oxford shirt and the charcoal trousers I wore when I needed to look like I believed in institutions, and canceled office hours. At 7:14 a.m., I called a lawyer. Her name was Rebecca Hinz, and one of the deans had mentioned her years earlier after an ugly divorce nobody discussed openly, but everybody knew the shape of. Rebecca's assistant answered with the clipped softness of someone used to panicked mornings. I said I needed a consultation, and that discretion mattered. She said Rebecca had an opening at noon. By 8:00, I was in my campus office under fluorescent light, staring at my framed diplomas and the map of 19th century California railroad expansion behind my desk, and feeling something I had not expected. Relief, not happiness, not vindication. Relief, because suspicion is a swamp. Once your mind enters it, every ordinary thing becomes contaminated. A late text, a new scent, a change in schedule. You can spend months decaying inside possibilities. But proof, even partial proof, has a shape. Proof gives pain edges. I taught my 10 o'clock lecture on progressive era hypocrisy with more composure than I would have thought possible. 40 students sat there pretending to care about the municipal corruption of a century ago, while I wrote names and dates on the board, and heard myself saying that institutions rarely collapse in a single blow. Most failures happen because the people inside them become more committed to appearances than maintenance. A girl in the second row underlined that sentence. At noon, Rebecca listened while I laid out everything I had in a conference room that smelled faintly of paper and coffee, and old carpet cleaned professionally once too often. The vehicle profile, the Bluetooth connection, the hotel location, the toiletries, the months of late nights that always seemed to coincide with committee emergencies. The way Jill had become not simply distant, but faintly indulgent toward my concern, as if I were a child she had already decided to outgrow. Rebecca took notes with a black fountain pen and interrupted only to clarify dates. Do you want to confront her? She asked. No. Do you want to save the marriage? I looked out the window at a jacaranda tree in bloom near the courthouse lawn and thought of Ellie in the driver's seat, careful and proud, asking whether she was too far from the curb. No, I said. I want to stop being the only one inside it. Rebecca nodded. That was the beginning of the calm part. There is a kind of dignity in moving from injury to procedure. We discussed accounts, property, timelines, custody expectations, what not to do, what to document, what not to say in writing. She was careful, pragmatic, and unsentimental, which was exactly what I needed. By the end of the hour, we had a plan for securing copies of statements, adjusting certain transfers within legal limits, and documenting evidence without turning myself into a man who lived in his own surveillance footage. You do not need every lie, she told me. You need enough truth to stop negotiating with fantasy. That sentence did more for me than anything else anyone said that year. Over the next 2 weeks, I said very little and noticed everything. Jill mistook my silence for submission. That was her first serious mistake. She got looser, not openly reckless at first, but the looseness of someone who thinks they are no longer being meaningfully observed. She would leave her phone face down on the counter and walk into the pantry. She stopped offering detailed explanations for late nights. She began saying things like, "It's just work, Ben," with a note of soft boredom, as if my questions were not accusations but failures of sophistication. She came home once smelling not of perfume but of hotel soap, something floral and generic that did not belong to our shower. Another time she changed in the guest bathroom after an event, and I found a little wrapped soap on the sink edge and a tiny lotion bottle in the wastebasket. The labels were from local hotels, all different. That, oddly enough, was the detail that humiliated me most at first. Not roses, not lingerie, hotel soap, something so impersonal it felt industrial. If what she was doing had even been grand, romantic, coherent, some part of the betrayed ego can still understand the architecture of its own ruin. But this was scattered, disposable, one-night stands parceled out across event weekends and donor meetings, hidden inside the free toiletries of rooms paid for by somebody else's organization. The sordidness of it made my stomach turn. I began going through our credit card statements at night after Jill fell asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and the kind of concentration I used to reserve for dissertation chapters. It was astonishing how quickly a narrative emerges when affection stops redacting it. Small bar tabs near hotels, valet charges in places she had claimed there was no parking, repeated tips to housekeeping on nights she supposedly drove home late. One hotel charged twice in 3 weeks, another only once. But the date matched a scholarship dinner in Sacramento where she had told me she stayed with a female colleague to save money. I checked event calendars, public listings, social media posts, hotel websites. There was nothing theatrical about it. If anything, it felt academic. Cross-reference, verify date, annotate. Pain turning clerical. The more I saw, the less frantic I became. That sounds monstrous if you haven't lived through it. People expect grief to intensify with evidence, and sometimes it does, but evidence can also remove the exhausting labor of doubt. Once I knew Jill was lying repeatedly and casually, once I knew the affairs were not one great doomed love, but a string of private appetites tucked into the margins of her work life, I no longer had to ask myself what my failures had done to create this. Her choices became legible as hers, and because I no longer had to plead with the mystery, I could plan. Chico in late spring has a specific kind of evening light, flat gold at first, and then suddenly violet once the heat drops from the sidewalks. During those weeks, Jill and I sat at baseball games for Ellie's school fundraiser, attended one faculty cocktail thing, and ate takeout Thai food at the same kitchen island, where she once texted another man with one hand and asked me whether I could wash the grapes. The ordinariness of those nights was grotesque. She still touched my arm in front of people, still asked whether I had seen her silver sandals, still reminded me to RSVP to a dean's dinner 3 months away. The arrogance of betrayal is not always cruelty. Sometimes it is administration. One Friday she came home from a regional foundation event in Sacramento with a garment bag over one shoulder, kicked off her heels by the door and said, "I swear, if I have to smile at one more divorced man with donor anxiety, I'm walking into traffic." She laughed. I looked at her and thought, you already have. Ellie was 13 that year, old enough to read rooms, young enough to internalize them. That mattered to me almost more than anything else. I was determined, whatever happened, not to turn her into an audience. Jill and I had one child, one bright, observant girl who loved theater, old Motown songs, and mashed potatoes in a way that made every restaurant menu a temporary disappointment. She had started asking, lightly at first, whether Mom was traveling more than she used to. Fundraising season, Jill said each time. That became the phrase, as if season explained appetite, as if campaign cycles excused moral weather. The thing that gave me final confirmation came on a Thursday afternoon in the faculty parking lot. I had taken Ellie to driving practice earlier that week, and when I adjusted the SUV settings afterward, Profile 2 had returned. Again, then a text arrived on Jill's tablet, which she had left on the dining room table because she trusted habit more than caution. It was only a preview. No name, just a line. Sweet this time, no more budget soap. I sat down. I remember the feel of the chair beneath me, the scrape of a mockingbird in the citrus tree outside, the way the screen darkened just enough to reflect my own face over the message. No more budget soap. I laughed once, not because it was funny, because the degradation of it became, for one absurd second, almost too perfectly shaped. I took a photo of the screen with my phone. Then I set the tablet down exactly where it had been. That night, Jill asked if I could iron the Navy table runner for Saturday's donor reception because she trusted my hands with fussy domestic things. She said it smiling, affectionate even, like a woman handing off a trivial task to a husband who remained useful. Saturday's donor reception. That was the event. It was for the North Valley Arts Initiative, one of the organizations Jill worked with most closely. The reception was being held at a private historic property just outside Chico, one of those old estates people call gracious because they have never had to keep them clean. The event would be half fundraiser, half cultivation dinner, full of local business owners, retired judges, trustees, 2 city council members, at least 1 state assembly staffer, and enough old Chico money to make everybody slightly more careful with adjectives. Jill was co-hosting. If you want to understand her, you have to understand that she did not simply like rooms like that. She believed they authenticated her. Every table setting, every handwritten place card, every donor name pronounced correctly, every pillar candle and polished wine glass was a way of telling herself she belonged among people who did not have to explain what they owned. Public grace was how she built her sense of self, which meant that whatever happened at that reception would matter to her in a way private pain never could. I did not decide to confront her there in some cinematic rush. I decided only after Rebecca said, very carefully, "If you are going to end this, do it where she cannot rewrite the tone afterward." That stayed with me. Privately, Jill would cry if it helped, or go cold, or accuse, or claim I had misunderstood something, taken one message and turned it into a drama. Publicly, in front of the exact world she had been using as cover, her options would narrow, not because I intended to humiliate her with spectacle, because I intended to remove her favorite camouflage. The week before the reception, Rebecca filed quietly. Temporary arrangements, preliminary petition. We timed everything so Jill would be served with the core documents at the event itself. Discreetly enough not to create a brawl. Publicly enough that she could not later pretend the marriage had simply drifted apart amicably under her own management. I bought a new tie for the occasion, navy with a narrow silver stripe, the sort of purchase you make when your life has started to feel like evidence, and you want one thing that belongs only to your own decision. On the day of the event, Chico was hot and dusty until late afternoon when a breeze came up from nowhere and moved through the valley as if somebody had opened a cooler door. Jill spent the day in a state of bright tension. Hair appointment at 11, florist call at noon, caterer panic at 1. She changed twice before settling on a slate blue dress with an open back and small pearl earrings that made her look, to anyone who did not know her, composed and expensive and faintly kind. At 4:30, while she reapplied lipstick in the hallway mirror, she said, "Please don't disappear into academic corners tonight." I stood behind her nodding my tie. "I'll try," she met my eyes in the glass. "I mean it, Ben. People read energy." There it was again. That need for me to serve as texture in a public image. She no longer honored in private. I almost admired the consistency. The estate sat among old walnut trees and clipped hedges, with white gravel drives and a lawn broad enough for bad ideas. The reception tables were set beneath strings of lights that would glow once dusk settled. Inside, the main room had polished wood floors, a staircase that pretended nobody had ever run down it drunk, and walls hung with oil portraits of people who had once mistaken land ownership for nobility. Waiters moved between rooms balancing trays of sparkling wine. A jazz trio tuned in one corner. The smell of cut greenery, candle wax, and roasted chicken drifted from the catering area. Jill was everywhere at once. Greeting, adjusting, introducing. Light hand on an elbow here, murmured thank you there, smile calibrated perfectly to each guest's net worth and usefulness. I moved through the room slowly, shaking hands, accepting compliments on my jacket from people who forgot every year that I was not in fact an attorney. The server I had arranged with Rebecca's office was there too, dressed in the standard black and white waitstaff uniform, carrying a folded manila envelope on a service tray hidden beneath napkins until the right moment. All evening, Jill glanced at me and looked satisfied. That was the part that stayed with me longest. Her satisfaction. She believed I was behaving, that whatever else she had done, she still knew exactly how far I would go in public. As the sun dropped and the lawn turned blue at the edges, a donor named Wesley Baird arrived. 60, silver-haired, locally revered, chair of 2 boards and rumored funder of more private appetites than anyone said aloud. I had seen his name in Jill's messages. Not often, enough, another in the series. Not the only one, but one of them. He greeted her with a familiarity so slight, most people would have missed it. A fingertip to the inside of her wrist. A smile that started too early. Jill's face changed by maybe half a degree. For anybody else, nothing. For me, complete confirmation. I watched them from across the room while pretending to listen to a museum trustee explain acquisition costs. Jill stepped too close while introducing Wesley to a younger couple. He touched the small of her back for half a beat longer than courtesy required. Then she crossed the room toward me with 2 glasses of white wine and handed me one as if nothing in the world had changed. "You look like you're preparing a lecture," she said softly. "I usually am," she smiled. "Tonight, please don't." That was the last private thing she said to me as my wife. Dinner began at 8. Long tables under the trees, white linen, low arrangements of olive branches and pale flowers, glassware catching the first full glow of the string lights overhead. Guests settled into their places, with the softened aggression of wealthy people deciding who mattered enough to sit near. Jill stood to give opening remarks once the salads were cleared. She was excellent. That was the terrible truth of it. Even then, even with everything I knew, she was poised, funny, grateful in exactly the right percentages. She spoke about preserving arts access, local heritage, intergenerational philanthropy, the usual pious theater. People smiled. Wesley Baird watched her with the private satisfaction of a man who believes he has been given a version of a woman others do not get. When she finished, the room applauded. Then the server moved. He approached from her left with the folded envelope resting on the tray beneath a coffee cup and 2 saucers. as if he were simply refreshing service at the head of the table. He leaned in and said her name quietly enough that only the nearest people heard it. Jill turned. He handed her the envelope. For one strange second, she accepted it automatically, still half inside the performance. Then she looked down, saw the legal stamp, and went still. I stood, not abruptly, not angrily. I rose with the ordinary calm of a man about to make a toast or excuse himself. Enough people noticed at once that the room softened into attention. Jill looked at me, not yet afraid, just confused in a way I had not seen in years. "Ben," she said. I took my water glass in one hand, though I never lifted it fully. "You asked me not to disappear into the corners tonight," I said. No one moved. Jill's face had lost all public color now. Wesley Baird looked from her to me, already beginning the math. I kept my voice level. That was the important part. Not icy, not cruel, just clear enough that everyone at the head tables could hear, and those farther back would feel the silence. "I thought it was time," I said, "for at least one honest thing to be handed to you in a room you care about." It landed exactly the way I had hoped it would. Not like a shouted accusation, like a verdict someone else had already reached before the room caught up. Jill whispered my name again, this time as warning, plea, and disbelief all at once. I looked at Wesley then, not dramatically, just long enough that he understood he had been identified without being named. He lowered his eyes to his plate. That, more than anything, told the table what kind of man he was. Then I looked back at Jill. "I'm done covering for what you do between events," I said. "No speech, no inventory of lies, no mention of hotels, soap, driver profiles, or one-night stands disguised as donor scheduling. The room didn't need detail. Detail would have made it theatrical. I wanted clarity." I set the glass down and took a step back from the table. A woman near the far end reached for her napkin and missed it. Somewhere in the yard, the jazz trio had stopped completely. Jill clutched the envelope so hard the top edge bent beneath her thumb. I gave the room a small, apologetic nod, because politeness deployed correctly can be more devastating than rage, and said, "Please continue." Then I walked away. No one stopped me. Behind me, chairs had not yet begun to move. That was the strange dignity of the moment. Wealth freezes before it scatters. People trained for decorum will sit inside almost any horror for at least 5 seconds before deciding what version of it they are allowed to acknowledge. I crossed the lawn, past the hedge, and kept walking until I reached the gravel drive where the valet stand glowed under hanging lanterns. Only then did I stop. My phone buzzed once before I got to the car. Jill, again, then again. I turned it off. The first week afterward was uglier in private than anything I did in public. Jill came home past midnight that night and found me in the guest room with a suitcase half-packed and Ellie asleep down the hall. She stood in the doorway still wearing the slate blue dress, hair loosened at the nape, makeup slightly broken by tears and anger. "How dare you?" she said first. That interested me less than it might have months earlier. Outrage is often the first refuge of exposed people. "I think you've used that word up," I said. Then came the expected sequence. Denial, minimization, partial confession, claims that nothing serious had happened, claims that I had made her look monstrous over a complicated year, claims that the service at the dinner was humiliating and unnecessary, and what would people think, and how could I do this to Ellie, and on, until the real architecture revealed itself. Not how could I betray you, how could you stop protecting the image. That was the wound she could not tolerate. I did not answer every accusation. I did not litigate every hotel. I said only what mattered. That I knew enough that Rebecca Hines would be in touch, that temporary arrangements were already drafted, and that I would not discuss the details in front of our daughter. At that, Jill sat down on the edge of the bed and cried in a way that was almost convincing. Almost, because even then, in the pauses between sobs, she was listening for what parts of the outcome remained negotiable. The weeks that followed were expensive, exhausting, and surprisingly clarifying. Wesley Baird vanished from Jill's orbit instantly, which told me everything I needed to know about his courage. 2 other names surfaced during discovery, one from Sacramento, one from a hotel in Redding. Rebecca was careful with how much I saw, because courts deal in fact, not appetite, and she understood better than I did that drowning in particulars would not improve the settlement. Jill alternated between remorse and resentment, nostalgia and legal posturing. She tried briefly to suggest counseling, not because she believed in us again, but because counseling sounds like virtue in mediation notes. I said no. Ellie spent the first month moving through the house more quietly than usual. That cut deepest, not Jill's affairs, not the money, the way children lower their volume when adults have made the air unstable. I took her to school, made dinner, sat through rehearsals, learned how to braid her hair badly enough that she laughed at me, which turned out to be the first truly hopeful sound in the house in weeks. Jill moved into a rental near Bidwell Park after 3 months. Smaller, stylish, too white. I knew the type without seeing it. She began rebuilding her public life immediately, because that was what she knew how to do. New committees, new photos, new blouses, an Instagram caption about resilience that one of my colleagues saw before I did, and wisely never mentioned. The divorce finalized 11 months after the donor dinner. By then, the story had settled in town, as such stories do. Not loudly, not all at once, quietly and permanently, through side conversations after events, and in parking lots outside benefits. Jill was still employable, still polished, still welcome in most rooms, but something had changed in the texture around her. Men were more careful. Women were slightly cooler. She had wanted consequence only if she got to curate it. She did not. As for me, peace came back in increments. The first morning I realized I had slept through the night without dreaming of hotel hallways. The first grocery trip where I did not buy her yogurt by habit. The first parent pickup line where I saw her from across the lot and felt irritation instead of pain. The first Sunday afternoon when the house was quiet, and that quiet sounded earned instead of abandoned. I did not rush toward another relationship. For a long time, solitude felt not lonely but corrective. I taught. I published an article on local rhetoric during the water wars. I took Ellie to San Francisco for a theater workshop. I started walking in Bidwell Park in the evenings when the weather cooled, listening not to podcasts or music, but to my own steps on the gravel and the small domestic noises of a city minding itself. That was where I met Lena, not at a gala, not through Jill, not through some grand karmic inversion, at a used bookstore fundraiser of all things, one of those modest library-adjacent events held in the back courtyard with folding chairs, bad wine, and earnest readers talking too long about regional memoir. I was there because a colleague had begged me to moderate a panel on California letters. Lena was there because she owned the bookstore and had spent the afternoon lifting boxes, arranging tables, and fixing a string of lights that kept going dead above the ficus tree. She was not glamorous in Jill's sense, which was one of the first things that made being near her feel like rest. She was 35, with dark hair usually pinned up in ways that came loose by evening, and she had the patient, amused concentration of someone who had spent years around people performing intelligence and no longer felt obligated to admire the performance. She read everything, remembered everything, smelled faintly of paper, cedar, and the coffee she drank too late in the day. We talked first about Joan Didion, and then, strangely, about high school theater budgets. Nothing happened quickly. That mattered. I told her gradually that I was divorced. Later, more carefully, why. She did not ask for salacious details. She asked instead whether Ellie was doing better, and whether I ever felt like certain rooms still belonged to another version of me. It was such a precise question that I had to sit with it. Yes, I said. Sometimes, she nodded. That passes. How did she know? Because she had lost things too, though different ones. A fiancé years earlier who had walked out not dramatically but administratively. A bookstore nearly closed during the pandemic. A father gone too early. She did not weaponize understanding. She simply had it. Peaceful solitude and new love turned out not to be opposites. The solitude taught me how to recognize the love when it arrived without noise. Lena did not need rooms. She liked them well enough, could move through them when necessary, but never seemed to borrow selfhood from their approval. That changed the weather of everything. We had dinners at home, bookstore closings that turned into wine on the back steps. Drives nowhere in particular, Ellie recommending songs from the passenger seat, while Lena pretended not to know the lyrics, and then got them all right anyway. The house became not healed exactly, but habitable in a new key. Almost 2 years after the divorce, Jill asked to meet for coffee. I knew before I went what she wanted. Not literally, maybe, but structurally. People who lose control of the ending often come back, asking for a softer version of the past. Closure, forgiveness, some line they can carry away and turn into absolution. We met at a cafe near downtown on a gray morning with rain threatening, but never committing. Jill arrived in a camel coat, slimmer than before, careful and beautiful in a way that made visible effort look like natural ease. For one strange second, I saw the woman I had once waited up for with actual tenderness. Then I saw what was missing. The reach. I no longer reached for her. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and said, "Thank you for coming." I nodded. "You said it was important." "It is." We sat in silence long enough for a barista to call out 2 names and for the front window to cloud lightly with the breath of people entering from the cool. "I've been thinking for a long time," Jill said, "about how badly I handled everything. That phrase interested me. Handled, as if the primary sin had been procedural. I said nothing. She looked down. I was reckless. Yes, I was unhappy. Yes, she gave a small, bitter smile. You don't make this easy. I'm not trying to make it anything. That seemed to land. She inhaled slowly. I know I don't get to ask this, she said, but I need to know whether you hate me. It was the wrong question in the most revealing way. Hate still grants intimacy. Hate still requires residence. Hate means the wound remains furnished. No, I said, I don't. Her eyes flickered up, hopeful too quickly. I continued before she could step into it. I think I mourned you for a while, I said. Then I realized I was mourning a version of you that wasn't there for longer than I wanted to admit. That was the truest thing I said to her in the entire conversation. She swallowed. That's fair. Rain began then, softly at first, a scattered tapping on the awning outside the window. I was stupid, she said. Yes, I was selfish. Yes, a tiny strained laugh. You've become very economical. I teach history, I said. I've had practice with failed empires. That made her smile despite herself, and for a second the old rhythm almost flashed back. The ease, the private humor, the version of us that once existed between grocery lists, and drives home and Ellie asleep in the back seat. Then it passed. She studied me for a moment. Are you happy? There was no malice in it, only pain and curiosity, and the last reach of someone trying to understand whether their own importance survived their choices. Yes, I said. With her, with my life. That answer seemed to cost her something. She looked out the window. I thought maybe, she said slowly. After enough time, maybe there would be some version of us that was possible again. Not what we had. I know that, but maybe something. I did not answer immediately because I wanted to be careful. Cruelty is easy at that stage. Precision takes more effort. There isn't, I said at last. She closed her eyes briefly. Because of what I did. Because of what's gone, I said. Not what happened. What's gone? That was the line, I think, that reached her more deeply than anger would have. I no longer loved the version of her I had been grieving. Not because I had hardened into bitterness, because she no longer existed in any actionable way. Whatever mix of truth and projection had made my old love possible had been replaced by a person I could understand, but not inhabit again. Jill nodded once, very small. I'm sorry, she said. I know, and I did. Or at least I knew she regretted the cost. Whether she regretted the appetites that produced it mattered less by then. When I stood to leave, she looked up and said, Ben, yes, I did love you. I believed she believed that. At one point, I said. Then I left. Outside, the rain had deepened just enough to silver the sidewalks and darken the trunks of the street trees. I stood under the awning for a second, breathing cold, damp air, and felt almost nothing dramatic at all. No triumph, no ache, no rush of closure sweeping through me like a movie score. Just quiet. That was the real ending. Not the donor dinner, not the envelope, not the legal stamp on white paper in a room Jill thought she controlled. Not even the coffee where she reached back and found nothing in me returning the gesture. The ending was quieter than all of that. It was Lena at my kitchen table later, that night with inventory sheets from the bookstore spread around her, and Ellie arguing gently with her over whether old cast albums counted as good driving music. It was the lamp near the sink turned on low, the smell of tomato soup and basil, the sound of rain against the windows, my own body no longer bracing when a phone lit up face down on the counter, because there was nothing left in the room hiding from me. For a long time, I thought betrayal would have to end with either destruction or forgiveness, blow the house apart or nobly absolve the arsonist. What no one tells you is that the truest closure is often administrative in the beginning, and almost embarrassingly ordinary by the end. A signed order, a changed account, a calmer breath, a different woman laughing in the next room, your daughter asking whether she can practice driving again this weekend. The family SUV showed a driver profile that didn't belong to anyone in my house, and by sunrise, I knew another man had been sitting where I taught my daughter how to drive. For a while, I thought that would be the image that stayed with me forever. It was. The image that stayed was simpler. A rainy Chico evening, warm kitchen light, Lena turning a page at the table, Ellie singing under her breath while she rinsed a bowl, the house steady around us. No performance, no borrowed image, no budget hotel soap hidden in a tote, no second life running parallel to the first. Just peace, and once you've lived long enough inside peace, you stop wanting anything from the people who taught you the value of it by destroying its opposite.